Welcome, everyone. Our latest guest in the CIBUK video interviews with interesting people from around the world is someone rather special. Until last year, Sarah Elliot was chair of Republicans Overseas UK, and she is now a spokesperson for that organisation. Currently, she chairs the Hamilton Society, which is a political discussion group for Republican Americans and British Conservatives. She started her career in Washington, DC, and is a veteran of many Republican political campaigns. Sarah was born and educated in the States, and she spent some time in Seville in Spain, and she now lives in Richmond in Surrey with her British husband and their two young daughters. Amongst other things, Sarah previously served as managing director for the American European Business Association in London. We thought her Anglo-American experience would give our audience a unique perspective from someone who understands both the UK and the US cultures and politics. So Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Can we start with Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. Many in our audience will have been very touched by the reaction of ordinary Americans to her passing. Is there anything that you want to say about that?
She was not just the Queen for the UK, but she was kind of like, especially the Western world's grandmother. She forged her young career as Queen right as America was really stepping into its own on the global stage after the Second World War. You know, she watched how the Americans and the Brits worked so closely together to achieve freedom for the West, and I would say for the rest of the world, and eventually freeing those in the Soviet Union. And she just exemplified the characteristics that have made America also great, and that is God, family, country. And in America, it is in that order that we value our priorities. And she was a devout Christian, but she practiced it in her daily life in a way that many Americans can relate and respect. And she was a great figurehead for Christianity throughout the world, as well as freedom. I don't know, she was just so steadfast. And she was so committed, and she took that vow seriously, and it was the vow to God on her coronation day. And she was authentic. And, you know, she visited America, and she went and she ended up having enchiladas and tacos with Ronald Reagan and Nancy around a fire with wood that Ronnie had cut. So, you know, she cherished the US, and we felt that. You know, but her leadership was exceptional, and there's no one else. There will be no one else like her in our lifetime.
That's very kind, Sarah. Thank you. You're spokesman for Republicans Overseas UK, which represents a great many Americans living in the UK. How would you characterize the majority view of Republicans when it comes to things like Brexit and their opinions on that?
I think Americans, by and large, don't understand the intricacies or how exactly the UK was weaved into the EU. But what they understand is big and small government, sovereignty and non-sovereignty, not being able to make the rules and laws of your own country. And for Republicans, they saw it as a way of asserting sovereignty that is rightfully yours as an individual nation. And they liked the idea of separating Great Britain away from this hegemon that would dilute the British character, the British country, and its ability to actually grow and thrive. So, you know, every Republican I met was pretty much in favor of Brexit, and but many Americans didn't really understand it. So even my left-wing brother-in-law was somewhat supportive of Brexit because, you know, we were.
Well, as we're on American topics, let's talk about independence, sovereignty, and freedom, something that, let's face it, the United States is well known for. To what extent do Americans know how much the EU has actually taken away from its member countries?
I think they understand the currency. So everyone, you know, goes by the euro, who's in the euro or the EU. And they understand that they have a lot of representative government that gets appointed, but not a lot of direct representation, not a lot of engagement in elections and accountabilities. And I know when I was studying the EU in Spain in 2003, it was, I went to my British professor at the time and I said, there's a huge democratic deficit here. There aren't checks and balances. You know, people get appointed and have like almost lifetime positions and they don't have to face the voters. Most Americans think that Democrats and lefties and internationalist globalists really like the EU. But if you are for individual freedom and sovereignty and you want more subsidiarity and federalism, much like the United States, you will be anti-EU. And also tons of red tape, tons of bureaucracy and waste of taxpayer money is associated with all of those images and thoughts of big government.
The impression that we get over this side of the pond is that that is really not understood in the US, that they still think, most people still seem to think, it's a kind of economic bloc rather than a wannabe United States of Europe. Do you think that's fair or not?
I think they probably think it is more of an economic bloc, but they also understand it impacts immigration and people can freely move and that sort of thing. But you know, Americans really like going abroad and seeing the diversity of Europe. They don't want to see everybody using the same currencies. They don't want to see everybody eating the same food or doing everything the same way. We like seeing the different nationalities exhibit their culture because it is our past as well. So many Americans love tracking their ancestry to the motherland, and they want to see the characteristics of their ancestors, perhaps, or the culture in which they came from. And then they went to America, to the New World, and carried on some of the same foods and traditions and maybe architecture, you know, or professions. I think it saddens some Americans, this kind of like homogenization of Europe. But again, they don't understand the court systems and the Supreme Court element. And they don't understand the Schengen arrangements and that sort of thing, but they do understand that they're ceding sovereignty to a globalist organization. They're very proud of the British for standing up for their rights.
Let's talk about Liz Truss and her policies. Having lived in the States, I know that most Americans probably won't even know who Liz Truss is. You are much more in touch with Americans living in the UK. What do you think their views are of the current situation?
Yeah, they're quite divided, even amongst conservatives. Some are in favor of the free market reforms, and some of them think we shouldn't be borrowing so much. So it's really quite divided. But we know that she would be better than anyone from the left. My leftist friends are not that crazy about Keir Starmer, but they were, you know, they were very happy to bash Boris as much as they could, but they're not really in favor of their guy. But, you know, I think the pendulum is swinging. I think the conservatives have been in power a long time, and that's just what happens with politics. And people want to give the other side a chance. So we'll see what happens. I personally think her free market reforms were great. I didn't think she should have U-turned. I think you have to dig your heels in. You got to fight for it because she understood it. You have to rip off the plaster pretty quickly in order to see change before the next general election. I think that's what she was trying to do. Maybe could she have done it in a better way? Clearly. But you know, I would have liked to have seen her stick to her guns in that way. I know she's a real free marketeer. I've worked with her on a US trip, and she wanted to meet with free market economists, and she wanted to understand how the US was revising their Rust Belt cities, much like the north of England here. Like, how was America, redefining itself in areas where industries were long gone? And I thought that was very good on her. That was a very thoughtful thing for her to do on one of her trips. So, time will only tell. But I think conservatives and Republicans are quite divided right now.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that Rust Belt rejuvenation in the States is kind of our equivalent of leveling up over here with some of our northern regions and cities.
Exactly.
My next question has to be about Dozy Joe. The impression we have is that the Biden administration is anti-British. Is that fair?
I think the Biden administration is more anti-Brexit than anti-British, but they are going to make anyone who is embracing Brexit feel the pain, feel their dislike of it. When Biden was on the campaign trail in 2020, a British journalist approached him and said, what do you think about Brexit? And he's like, what? And he goes, well, what do you think about Boris? And he's like, oh, Boris, Brexit. I'm Irish.
He's not Irish at all. I mean, his family comes from Sussex in England.
Some Americans don't know their heritage, do they?
Clearly he doesn't.
But he's definitely taken a pro-EU side, and it's not surprising because he's a big government liberal whose voting record over the past 50 years has increasingly gone to the left. He's part of the establishment that like to lift up one phone to call one phone number in Brussels and deal with all of Europe in a much more simplified manner. So he's part of that thinking. And he's also, I mean, not to be rude, but how much thinking is he doing? I mean, he's not in the prime of his career, it's fair to say. He seems lost and distracted, and he should probably be retired, enjoying his retirement in Delaware, rather than being president of the United States. So unfortunately, these biases that he has and Nancy Pelosi has, they don't mind wielding and taking little stabs. But it's also because there used to be a huge chunk of the Irish population, in fact the vast majority, all voted Democrat, and they're old enough to remember that when you were Irish or identified as Irish, you voted Democrat. And that has changed over the last 30 to 40 years. But Joe Biden is still lost in the past. He's been stuck in Washington or on an Amtrak train to Delaware for the past 50 years. So, I think he's out of touch. I think it's a shame that they take this approach, because you shouldn't mess in, nations' decisions, and Obama said, get at the back of the queue, and that actually helped vote leave. That helped the Brexit campaign.
A lot has been made of the potential of a UK-US free trade agreement and the threats to this from the Biden administration on a regular basis, and from people like Nancy Pelosi, who you mentioned a moment ago, who, for our audience, is the Speaker of the House. It seems that the UK is now bypassing the administration, and that started, funnily enough, with Liz Truss, actually, where she was going straight to states, individual states, and doing deals with them. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I'm quite in favor of free trade agreement. I thought that the UK should look to the US in the wake of Brexit and create a wonderful free trade deal, kind of saying, well, Europe, if you're not going to play nice, if you're not going to, cooperate, we'll go to our best ally, the United States, and we'll do business with them. They're a huge market-based economy. Let's go. But, for various reasons, that didn't happen under the Trump administration as much as the US ambassador Woody Johnson at the time wanted it to. And I think it is because you're you're not just dealing with one nation, you're dealing with also 50 states. And states have their own laws, as do Congress, and as we do at the national level. So it is actually easier to go state by state, believe it or not, and just to deal directly with state legislatures and governors. And at the end of the day, as long as we increase trade and commerce, even though we are each other's biggest foreign direct investment partner, it will further the special relationship. It will further economic ties. It'll be better for both countries, and we'll get goods at lower prices, goods that we need to keep a good standard of living. And I think Liz was actually quite clever in doing it that way. I will say that I think the civil service on both sides of the Atlantic played a major stumbling block to that. Also, as you probably know, the civil service is also in favor of the EU and was not in favor of Brexit. And I think there were some efforts within the civil service not to make a success of Brexit. And one way to do that would be to sabotage anything that the UK could do with the United States.
Let's talk Northern Ireland. Neither President Biden nor Nancy Pelosi and her friends seem to us to have any knowledge of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, what it entails, and that it's effectively been breached by the EU. And that was confirmed by one of the authors of the agreement, the late Lord David Trimble. He was very clear about it. What are your views on all of that? Because it does seem to be a stumbling block between our two countries at the moment.
Yeah. Again, Nancy Pelosi, our Speaker of the House, who probably won't be Speaker much longer after the midterm elections in November, and Joe Biden are using the peace agreement as a thorn in which to whip or stick in Britain's side over Brexit. And they don't understand it fully, even though some of them were involved with it in the late 90s. I think they're just getting their talking points from their EU partners and from Ireland in order to stir the pot and make it difficult for Britain, because we are a great ally of theirs. And it wouldn't surprise me if they don't understand it at all. Most Americans don't really understand what it was, but they did understand the troubles, and they were glad when the troubles could be ended and there was peace and some kind of agreement. But the detail escapes them. And again, I think most of these politicians are working on the macro level, on big picture, and they're just trying to undercut Brexit or the UK going too independent. I just think it's another way to undermine your sovereignty.
We have to talk about a major foreign policy issue very briefly and get your views on it, which is Ukraine and Putin's illegal invasion of it. In Europe, the UK has led the response. Internationally, it's been the US that has predominated. Do you want to comment on Ukraine and on the US response from the perspective of Republicans overseas? Okay.
This has been a really interesting one, because for the first time in my working within Republican politics, has there been a division about, over the issue of war. And there is a strain that has popped its head up that's much more about restraint and maybe even isolationism. Not everybody in the Republican Party is thrilled about getting involved in this Ukrainian-Russian war. Some because, we're on the precipice of nuclear war if we go head to head with Russia, but also because we have sunk trillions and trillions of US dollars, taxpayer money, into places like Iraq and Afghanistan over 20 years. And for what? Our horrible and embarrassing withdrawal of Afghanistan after 20 years of trying to promote democracy and provide infrastructure and education in that country, as well as defend it against terrorism, which was our initial mission there, has failed. And in a very public and dangerous way. And I just think Americans are like, listen, my gas prices at the tank have tripled. Our food prices are skyrocketing. Why are we sending billions of dollars to the Ukraine why can't we work on making things better at home? And so I think there's too many domestic fires that need putting out, and Republicans are really questioning, U.S. foreign policy involvement in that region over the last 10 years as well. Was the U.S. really propping up a corrupt regime to begin with? And what's really sad is that there's been a huge distrust of our U.S. institutions like the FBI and the CIA and even the Department of Defense and now the National Institute of Health and CDC because of COVID. Whether we should really be trusting these institutions. Are they really working in our best interest, or are they working more in their own personal best interests? Are they capitalizing and monetizing when America goes to war? So, I think everybody can say that what Putin has done is atrocious and should not have been done. But Republicans will also say, well, if Donald Trump was president, there would not be a war in Ukraine.
Very interesting to hear what you have to say, because there is debate equally in the UK about this, and we see a lot of it. But be that as it may, people are entitled to their views. And I think one thing that you and our audience would agree on 100% is the right to freedom of thought and expression.
Absolutely.
What do you think about the midterms? What do you think about whether Biden will actually see out his term of office? What do you think about the prospects for the GOP, the Republican Party, retaking the Senate and the House?
Will Biden finish out his term? I think he just may, yeah. But this is only because my question involves his health and his age, not because I think the Democrats will depose him, although they probably should. But I think he'll probably see out through the end of 24. Will he go for re-election? Right now, he says he will. I think many Democrats do not want this, but I think they wanted someone like Andrew Cuomo of New York, but then he fell from grace through sex scandals and COVID scandals. He's off the table, but they're looking more towards someone like a Gavin Newsom of California, who I can tell you will not play well in many households across the Midwest and the South. But anyway, I think that's where they're looking. They can only look to the coastal states because they really have alienated their working class base, and they're primarily now metropolitan elite voters in the coastal cities, very much like what the Labour Party has done here in the UK. My explanation for it is that this kind of woke left wing, very far left thinking that has infiltrated the party comes from the Ivy Leagues and Oxford and Cambridge, and they often go and take big jobs in the cities with big firms and corporate America and the tech world, and then they end up aggregating in those places. In terms of this midterm, which is coming up on November 8th, so in the United States, historically, Americans like to have a Congress that is of the opposite party than who is in the White House. So it's very typical that they will break the other way. But of course, this is not typical times because of things like Afghanistan, COVID, and inflation, and a war in Ukraine. The number one voting issue for Americans is inflation and pocketbook issues, so money. And Republicans score 30 points above Democrats for solving and improving that issue. So we are looking at potentially a red wave in November. It's not going to be quite like 2010 when Obama was in office and the Tea Party came in and pushed back against national health care, where we won 60 seats in the US House that year. There are 35 toss-up seats right now, and they could be toss-up for a variety of reasons, from candidate selections to the division of we call them blue and red states, and when it's a mixed state, we call them purple. So they could be like a purple kind of bellwether locality or constituency. In the Senate, we have 7 toss-up seats. Really, the Senate is not clear at all. This will be very exciting to see.
Let me just cut to the chase. If I slap my $100 bill on the table and bet you, which way would you go if I say that the Republicans will take the House and the Senate on the 8th?
I'm a bit of a pessimist, I think, on this, just because I'm not sure of the candidates we have in places like Georgia and Pennsylvania. So I say Senate stays Democrat, the House goes Republican. I think the Republicans take the White House in 24. The Democrats are all over the map, and they have a failing agenda. All they know how to do is tax and spend, and it's growing inflation through the roof. So. Yeah, and for the Republican candidate in 24, I think there's an over 50% chance Donald Trump runs. Not totally convinced he wins. But I don't think he will run unless he really thinks he can win. And Ron DeSantis of Florida is a very successful governor. He never shut down during COVID. His death rates for COVID were not very high, even though he has an aging population there. He's also been very good about keeping the gender conversation and trans conversation away from children in the state, which appeals to parents. And he's been tough on woke companies like Disney. And he's been very good at taking care of natural disasters, just like Hurricane Ian that just swept through Florida. So he's also quite witty and combative in a press conference, which he loves. And that reminds us of Trump, but without the crassness. He served his country. He was in the Navy. And he has a wonderful family. His wife just survived breast cancer. And she has a very compelling video out on her husband, who was a wonderful family man during that period. So, he's getting rave reviews. I think he's going to win quite easily in November. And I think the Americans across the country would like somebody who can unify the party, not divide them, as Trump does.
The impression some of us are getting over here is that DeSantis may well be the one. He may well be the man. Really depends on Donald Trump, doesn't it? Because he's got such a personal following that could be a tricky runoff.
Yeah, and a lot of people who are very loyal to Trump also like DeSantis, but they're kind of saying DeSantis needs to wait his turn. But in politics, if you're going high, you got to take advantage of it, because that high doesn't come back. So I think DeSantis should run. I don't think he should go into an agreement with Trump to be his VP or any of the sort. And quite frankly, I know people who went to Yale with DeSantis, and he has wanted to be president his whole life. Some people look down on that, but I don't, because quite frankly, we need people who want to take on the job and all the pressure that comes with it. And, he's been a great governor of Florida. So, and no masking and no vax mandates or anything like that.
I have one final question for you. What's it like being an American living in the UK?
Oh, it's great fun. I love living here. I don't actually want to return. And I've been here now 9 years and counting. And I sometimes forget that I have an American accent when I meet with people and that I'm out and about, because I'm very comfortable here. This is home now. I do miss home. There are certain times a year I do miss, like, seasonally, this time of year especially. I miss home, but London has so much to offer. The UK has so much to offer that I've really enjoyed exploring your country and making it home. And I love now that I get with my 2 children, that I get to share with them 2 amazing countries that actually my country couldn't have existed without yours. And the Brits gave us the foundation for the United States. And so that's one of the reasons Americans are forever grateful to the Brits. We have this kinship with you. Because we know that our liberty and our freedom and our very unique form of government would never have been formed without, the Magna Carta. for instance, and your parliamentary democracy. And so there's a lot of respect there. And yes, you have a constitutional monarchy. No, it would not work in the United States, but we sure like to live vicariously through you. And kind of have a touch to that to that past, to that history. And we respect that history. We get excited about a 200-year-old church. You all have 1,000-year-old churches, not older. So, one day we would love to look back on our country's heritage as being 1,000 years old.
Beautifully put, if I may say, and your observations, I'm sure, certainly for me, and I'm sure for the audience, will have been very interesting to everybody.
I hope so.
Sarah, you've been a wonderful guest, and we look forward to seeing you again sometime.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you.